So hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of You Are My Boro with myself, Scott Wilson and Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. We've got loads to go at. We've got Stoke obviously at the weekend, so we will have a look at that. We'll touch on everything Michael Carrick was talking about at his press conference early this week, and we'll also reflect on yesterday, which was obviously a rather big anniversary in the life of the Boro, and we'll talk about everything that we've been doing in terms of the Echo pieces and features and everything that we've done around that this week. Little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you're watching this on YouTube, then please comment, leave us a comment and subscribe if you haven't already done that. And if you're listening to this on one of the various podcast platforms that we're on, then please rate and review. Dom, you had a good week?
I have, yeah. I'm living the dream today. One of the perks of working from home days I'm looking at now. I've had the World Indoor Athletics on all morning and the darts on, the UK Open darts on.
There we go. There we go. Doesn't get better than that, does it?
Oh, quality.
Beautiful. Right, well, speaking of living the dream, you're going to Stoke tomorrow.
Indeed, yeah.
Can you do it on what is inevitably going to be a wet Saturday afternoon in Stoke?
Insert service station chat here. Yeah, it's. I don't think I've been to Stoke since, and this isn't a happy memory, the relegation season when that was like as things. I think Karanka was still there, wasn't he? And that was when it was clear. It was clear that Boro were on the slide, and it was pretty clear at that stage. I'd have to look back. Was that when there was suggestions of Ramirez and Ledbetter at half-time having words, and weren't Boro 2-0 down at half-time?
Yeah.
Really check this before
everything was well and truly unraveling then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't think I've been since. I remember they've got a proud picture of Rory Delap getting ready to roll out one of his long throws up in the press lounge.
Yeah. It's a cliche, but it's one of those grounds where it just always does seem to be wet and wild whenever I've been there.
There's corners in it.
The wind just whips through the corners, doesn't it? Must be a cold old end for the away fans to be in as well, I always think.
And I know we're going to get onto it, but clearly it's a big game for Boro. They want to get back after last week's disappointment. It is a huge game for Stoke, isn't it?
Yeah.
You look at how things have because and I know we didn't want to be talking about the relegation battle here, but a few weeks ago it looked like 2 from 3. Rotherham were gone, weren't they? And then it looked like Sheffield, Huddersfield, QPR, 2 from those 3 had go, and yet those 3 teams have all picked up and they've dragged a load of teams into it. Boro are only 9 points clear now, aren't they?
Well,
Blackburn and Birmingham, Stoke and.
Let's start there then. Listen, what are we? We've got 13 games of the season to go. Boro are currently 13th. They are 11 points off the playoff positions, albeit with a game in hand. And as you've rightly said, they are 9 points clear of the relegation zone, again, with a game in hand on most of the teams below them. We're getting towards the ultimate mid-table position, really, aren't we? Is that realistically, where do you see this season going now, Dom?
Well, the beauty of the championship, there's been various times, hasn't there, where the last day or the last 2 days of a championship season, there's only been like 4 or 5 teams who've actually had nothing to play for. But with Boro, that's looking likely that how the final weeks of the season are going to play out. And now they've got to get first. Let's look up. They've got a game in hand. If they were to win that game in hand, that'd be 8 points.
Yeah,
they need to. That you'd have 12 games left after that. How many would you have to win realistically? 8, 9 of those 12 to stand a chance.
Yeah, you're talking 3 to get back level, aren't you? And then you're going to have to win another 4 or 5 to kick further on. So, yeah, I would think so.
Carrick said yesterday, which I'm sure we'll talk about here, that Boro still have to believe. You can't write the season off. But I think now there's a general acceptance that looks extremely unlikely and would be a massive ask just because of the inconsistency of recent weeks. Boro have lost 3 from 4. And I think what was so disappointing about the Plymouth defeat was the Leicester win was such a boom. And then you just looked at that Plymouth game, and 4 of Borough's next 5 games are against teams in the bottom half. So you looked at that Plymouth game and thought, well, if we can build on that there, potentially there's an opportunity. Obviously, Boro didn't. So that leaves them in the position they're in. As for looking kind of over the shoulder, 9 points, if they were to lose the weekend, for example, then that gap tightens again. I don't think Boro are going to get sucked into a relegation battle. I think they'll win more than enough games between now and the end of the season. And I think for the same reason why I think a playoff push looks extremely unlikely is the same reason I won't get sucked in. It's not just the points, it's the teams between them. And there's an awful lot of teams between Boro and the bottom 3. Clearly complacency can't set in, and I don't think it will set in. But it would take a mess of a running between now and the end of the season, wouldn't it, for Boro to get
a problem.
What do you think?
No, I agree. I think the worry is that it just becomes a real nothing of a 2 month, and that I think you can kind of take that as fans and whatever. If you're talking about the last couple of matches, okay, if you run out of steam and you're not going to make it, and the last couple of games are pretty meaningless, then that's okay, that's fine. We've all been there before. There's been plenty of seasons that have ended up like that. I think if you're talking about playing 2 months worth of matches that deep down everybody probably knows don't have an awful lot riding on them, you're not going up, you're not going down, that becomes a bit of a slog, doesn't it? It becomes a slog for the fans who still have some really long away trips that they're going to have to negotiate and tackle. How do you kind of motivate yourself and the financial cost and everything that goes with them when it's not really up for anything? But then the players themselves, Michael Carrick will say all the right things. We know they're professionals, etc., etc., etc. But if you're going into games knowing that ultimately the outcome doesn't really have anything riding on it massively, then that is a difficulty, that is a challenge, and so that would be my worry for the rest of this. I'm like you. I don't see a scenario where Boro are seriously threatened by relegation, but I also now think 11 points is just far too big a gap to make up to realistically have a chance, given that there are teams up there in the playoff mix who will win 4 or 5 of their next 6 or 7 to make it pretty much nigh impossible for Boro to get there. So that would be my worry. Are we just going to drift through to the end, really? And like you say, Michael Carrick was kind of asked about that yesterday, and he said what you would expect him to say. But in some ways, it's going to be a different test of his managerial kind of portfolio, if you like, of how he negotiates this next couple of months. If it is, pretty obvious that the season's going nowhere, because that's a challenge in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, because yesterday I went down the classic line of, are the players playing for their future, even if Boro aren't going to finish in the top 6 this year? And Carrick basically said no. He said, obviously, the players are always having to impress to stay in the team. But what he said was there's no extra scrutiny on the players between now and then. I don't think there are many players who, obviously, there's Paddy McNair, whose contract's uncertain. Yeah. And there are players on the fringes, for example, and then there's the loanees in the future of the likes of Luke Ayling and Lewis O'Brien to be determined. But I don't think there's many players who you'd say are going into a summer of complete uncertainty, really. And we'll touch on this and kind of what to expect in the summer. But this is quite a rare scenario for Boro in general, isn't it? How many times since relegation in 2009 have Boro at this stage of the season been playing for very little? Because if you look back at recent seasons, obviously not last year, the year before under Chris Wilder, it was on the last day of the season at Preston when they fell short. The year before under Warnock, Boro fell away, but were very much in the mix, weren't they? I mean, come the turn
certainly
of the
at this stage of the season, yeah.
Yeah, the turn of the year, kind of automatic promotion didn't seem out of the realms of possibility. The year before that, it was relegation that was the worry. Yeah. So there's been very few seasons when Boro have been in this position at this stage. And it is a test for Carrick. I think it's a test for Carrick and it's a test for the players. And I just think it's so important to kind of keep the mood as upbeat as possible going into the summer and going into next season. It'd be damaging, wouldn't it, if form just completely fell off a cliff as it has done really in the last few weeks, between now and the end of the season, if that was extended, I think Boro need to give the fans some optimism, really, and something to cheer about and something to be excited about going into next season, when clearly the ambition is going to be right there in the mix again.
So let's look at tomorrow then. Before we kind of look at the wider picture, let's focus in on the game itself tomorrow. I mean, how are we looking injury-wise and team news-wise? Obviously, the news on Hackney was not good. The news on Howson a little bit better.
Yeah, Hackney a few weeks, he said, or a number of weeks. Howson hopes to be back in training next week. That's a big boost, because the early indication with Howson and Hackney was that they were both pretty long-term, weren't they?
Yeah.
By long-term, I mean 5-6 weeks. But Howson's clearly going to be back. Dale Fry's still out tomorrow. And Carrick suggested yesterday that the likes of Isaiah Jones are still no closer to being ready. Emmanuel Latte-Lath, will he come in for a start after being back on the bench?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would. I mean,
it's not like any of the solutions that we've tried so far have really banged the door down and said, you have to keep on doing this.
If he's come through unscathed last week and this week, I think he's got to start, hasn't he? Because who's keeping him out?
That's it. That's it. Exactly. We've seen Greenwood up there. We've seen Azaz up there. We've seen Silvera up there. We haven't really seen Force up there, which is still another moot point. But everything that's tried hasn't really worked, has it? Boro have needed a striker. We've said for weeks and weeks and weeks they need someone to lead the line. Well, Latte-Lath, if he's anywhere near right, and the fact that he came through that sub appearance on skid suggests he must be pretty close, then surely he's got to play.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it'll be an obvious boost just to have a striker, a natural striker, leading the line. You were there last week, and it just sorry, no, you weren't with the Plymouth game, but that just clearly didn't work. The system didn't work. Michael Carrick held his hands up afterwards and admitted, he said it was on him, although it wasn't clear whether he meant the selection or the approach or just everything in general, really. But that didn't work, and it feels like on the back of a defeat like that, changes are inevitable. I wonder whether Senny Dieng comes back in tomorrow for Glover. I'm surprised he hasn't already, to be honest.
I was just going to say that. That's been a strange one because, Dieng was clearly the number one at the start of the season. Now, yes, he had the injury. He was going to go away. He then came back. He had to recover from the injury. So I can understand that there was maybe a little bit of hesitation about throwing him straight in. But he's clearly fit now. I mean, he's been on the bench for the best part of a month. So he's clearly fit. Glover, he's had good moments. He's had not so good moments. I think what you would say is he's not really delivered a string of performances that would make you say he now has to be the number one. So I think if Dieng is going to still be your number one moving forward, and I would have thought that he would be, given how well he performed in those early stages of the season. It struck me as a bit strange that he hasn't been back in yet.
I understood after the Sunderland game and that mistake. I thought then that he'd keep Glover in just because it's a bit of a hit on confidence if you make a mistake and then you're hooked from the team, aren't you? The following week. So I wasn't surprised that he stayed in after that, but I am surprised that he's continued to be named as the keeper. I don't think he's been convincing at all. I thought he was in the early stages. I thought in his first few games he looked good. A couple of really good games, but I don't think he's been convincing at all in the last few weeks. I don't think his distribution's been great. The Preston game, obviously, there's question marks over the first goal. Obviously, the Sunderland one, the first goal last week against Plymouth. It is surprising that he hasn't been brought back in. It's similar to the McGree one earlier in the season, I think, where that seemed a bit of a perplexing one that McGree wasn't playing. Carrick, for whatever reason, whatever the reasons are, he'll have his reasons, and we'll see tomorrow. But it'd be if Glover was to stay in again tomorrow, then I think it'd be an interesting one. Is he then the number one? Is it?
Yeah.
At what stage is Glover your number one and Dieng the deputy?
Well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, yeah, exactly. It's if he's in for another couple of matches, then you'd suggest he's probably going to stay until the end of the season.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Dieng was one of the undoubtedly plus points of the first half of the season, wasn't he? I think
Yeah.
when you got to October, November, if you're saying who's been the best signing, I know Morgan Rogers went for big money in January, but the vast majority, I think, at that stage would have said Dieng.
Yeah.
He came in and kind of convinced from the off, really. Obviously, he got the injury at Swansea, which was just before he went away. And yeah, things have clearly changed since.
Anything else to come out of the kind of presser yesterday, or the chats with Carrick? Anything else that you'd flag up as of interest?
Well, he looked ahead to the summer, and obviously last summer we've talked about this at length, haven't we? It was an overhaul, a bit of a reluctant overhaul, really, a reluctant revamp because of the all alone players going back, Chuba Akpom leaving, and Boro were in a position where they had to replace like 5-6 of their very best players from last season. Carrick talked about the importance of continuity and stability and consistency this summer. Now, clearly, I think on social media today that a fair few fans have reacted, and we do need another overhaul. Boro will look to strengthen the squad undoubtedly this summer. Clearly, a centre forward's the priority. Right back's an area they're going to look at, depending on Luke Ayling's situation. Centre midfield, centre half, depending on Paddy McNair's situation. Attacking midfield, depending on the Sam Greenwood situation, because I think Leeds are looking increasingly like automatic promotion winners, aren't they? And we've discussed what that could mean for Greenwood. So clearly, Boro are going to be looking at 4 or 5 signings in the summer. But what they're not going to be having to do is replace 4 or 5 major players who are leaving. Now,
that's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously there are question marks. You don't know what offer might come in for a Hayden Hackney, Rav van den Berg. But and 2 things, Boro will obviously do all they can to keep those players. And you would hope they'd have plans in place for if and when those players go. But that aside, there's loan players, but the team isn't built around loan players this season like it was last season. They're not going to be losing, 60, 70 goals like they lost last season. It feels like it's more adding to what's there rather than having to replace and start again, which was the case last summer, wasn't it? It was a new team, completely new team at the start of this year.
I agree. I think it still feels like they need to get that main attacker right, though.
Oh, undoubtedly.
We've been saying it for a couple of windows now, and yes, you can tinker around at right back. They'll need to bring in a centre half. I think probably regardless of what happens with McNair. But ultimately, I think we're back to a scenario where, to a large extent, the success or failure of whatever Boro do on the summer will hinge on
the striker.
Can they get the striker right? Because that's inevitably where they're going to have to spend the bulk of their money. We were at the stage now, and I think the club know it, in fairness to them, that they're going to have to probably invest pretty heavily now in a striker, a permanent, to get someone in who's going to be the main man last season. Clearly, the hope this season was that Latalath would become that. Well, largely through no fault of his own, he's not really had the chance to show whether he's capable of that or not. So, maybe between now and the end of the season, Latalath will embark on a kind of run that suggests, actually, you can rely on him a bit more next season than maybe it looks like at the minute. But aside from that, I think, that's where the gap is, isn't it? And the club know that, and Carrick knows that, and we all know that, really.
And there's nothing more difficult than signing a centre forward, is there, in the transfer window? But it's easier in the summer than it is in January.
Definitely.
We kind of don't need to go over that again and the January window. But there were players who Boro kind of monitored and looked at, but were always well aware that they weren't going to be available in January, that was never a possibility. Now, obviously, those will be revisited in the summer. And that's the undoubted priority, because the others, centre midfield, obviously Johnny Howson's situation needs to be resolved again, and then there's the O'Brien position, right back, Ayling, but you're starting from a relatively strong point in those positions, aren't you? You've still got players there, whereas up front you've only got 2 players who've spent a large bulk of this season injured and are both unproven at this level over a long period of time. Coburn, we know, was going to go out on loan at the start of the season before those plans changed. you might even be looking at 2 strikers, mightn't you? Depending on.
I think there's every chance. I mean, I think there's every chance because, you know, I guess the way that Carrick plays with really only one, maybe you're looking at a 9 and a 10. I think you're looking at 2 forwards. Let's put it like
on Greenwood, yeah.
Especially if it is starting to look increasingly likely Greenwood probably doesn't sign or might not sign anyway.
Because if Greenwood wasn't to sign, then you've got those players behind. You've got Force, Azaz, Jones, McGree. And Greenwood now. Silvera, sorry, yeah. So if you take Greenwood out of it, you're probably definitely looking at needing one more in there, aren't you?
I think so. Yeah, I think so because
maybe someone like you
they're the kind of key players to Carrick's team. I mean, I guess they maybe become slightly less important if you have a genuine number 9 who's going to get you 20 goals a season. But at the moment, that's where Boro are relying for, goals, creativity, threat, everything really is coming from those wide attacking or number 10 positions.
Yeah, Johnny Howson, I mean, we have this conversation every year, but that another contract there feels likely, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does for a whole host of reasons, on and off the pitch. I mean, we all know how important Howson is off the pitch. We all know how much Carrick values him. He has a massive leadership role that he plays there in a squad that doesn't have a lot of leaders in it, let's be honest, really. So I can see the importance of that. Now, I don't think, given his age, you necessarily sign him just for that if he's clearly incapable of doing it on the pitch anymore. But he's not, is he? He's shown this season that he's still more than capable of playing a role within the Championship. Now, I think it'll be interesting between now and the end of the season. He's coming back, but Barlaser and O'Brien have kind of had a run. They've started to establish themselves there. I think it'll be interesting to see how much football Howson plays between now and the end of the season, because maybe for the first time, well, really, in all the time he's been here, we are going to start to get to a point where actually he's not first choice anymore, and that actually Carrick's first choice team maybe doesn't have Howson in it. I'm not saying we're definitely there yet, but you could see that between now and the end of the season, couldn't you?
I think at the minute the first choice pair for me would still undoubtedly be Howson and Hackney. I think Barlaser, I think, is on the whole disappointed in the last couple of months. I think the interesting one's O'Brien, because O'Brien, as we've talked about, was one of the league's best midfielders a couple of seasons ago. He hasn't had a run. Regardless of whether Howson's fit or not, it wouldn't surprise me to see O'Brien get a run now to see what he's capable of in the middle. And whether now, I don't know whether a summer move's possible. I don't know the finances of that. I don't know what his wages are at Nottingham Forest. I don't know what Forest's kind of stance is on it. But if Boro are considering the option of bringing him in a permanent in the summer, then you'd think that they'd want to see a run of him now in the team in that position between now and the end of the season. So I think if you've got a fully fit Howson now, but without Hackney, I'd probably go with Howson and O'Brien. It's the two, yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, won't it? It'll be interesting to see. And before we wrap up, then, what about what did kind of Carrick have to say on the week? Then, I mean, obviously, clearly he wasn't here when all the Carling Cup stuff was going on, but he's an integral part of Boro now. I suspect he was kind of asked for his thoughts on it and everything.
Yeah, he was there last night. He was there at the town hall last night for the reunion. Gareth Southgate, Massimo Magaroni, Zilad Neneth, Stewie Downing, Bolo Zenden. And that looked great, the pictures and videos I've seen from there. And you went down to speak, you spoke to Steve Gibson and to Gareth Southgate, didn't you?
Yeah.
On Southgate first, I mean, it says a lot about him that the current England manager has an hour in his diary, welcomes you down to St. George's Park.
Yeah.
And he's more than happy.
Makes time to see one of us two clowns.
So,
listen, that was exactly it. I mean, so, obviously covered the club when Gareth was here, both as a player and a manager. Had a really good relationship with him at the time. But obviously he's moving in very, very different circles now as England manager and everything. So,
he doesn't forget where he's come from.
Try and set it up. And to be fair to him, he could not have been more accommodating or nicer in terms of, I'd love to do it, Scott. We'll try and make it work with my diary. As I say, I went down to St. George's Park. I thought what was really nice was I had about an hour with him, and the first 15 minutes, he was just wanting to know which of the journalists are still working up on the patch, who's still up there that I dealt with. How do you get on? How are you getting on with Steve? Do you ever see Dave Parnaby anymore? What's he up to? Just wanting to know what was going on with Boro, really, which I thought, and kind of us lot up here. And I thought that was really lovely. And Gareth being Gareth, he was genuinely interested in it. It wasn't just, kind of saying it because he felt that he had to. There was a genuine interest there. And then we did the interview. And then for 15 minutes after that, we were just kind of chatting about him in England and Boro and everything. It was lovely. It was really, really nice. And I think what came through from the piece and what comes through from speaking to him is that Boro was a massive, massive part, not just of his footballing career, but of his life. He just bought into everything around Boro so much. He wanted to be the kind of captain, the figurehead that won the trophy. He wanted to be someone that the town and the club could be proud of. And as he said, he actually only ever played for 3 clubs: Villa, Boro, and Palace. And he said that even today, every one of them has a massively special place in his heart. But it was obviously at Boro and Villa that he actually won things. And as he said, yes, winning the League Cup with Villa was great, but Villa have won a European Cup before. Boro, this was the trophy, wasn't it? This was the moment.
I was going to say, you're touching it there, but reading the piece when I read it, but what struck me was kind of the emotional investment, really. He talked about coming in and realising quickly what Tony Mowbray meant to the town and wanting to almost follow in his footsteps, and then also talking about Ugo.
Yeah, which was quite a poignant moment. And he just kind of said that kind of prompted, really, that he doesn't have a lot of regrets in his life, but one of the big ones, as he said, was that post his playing career, he never got the chance to actually sit down with Ugo and tell him just what he thought about him as a person more than a fellow centre half and then the player he played alongside. And so that's why I think, even though I'm sure he's got 1,000,001 things on his plate, he was absolutely determined he was going to be there last night, Southgate, because, he made the point that I'll always be a part of this team, and this team will always be a massive part of my life, and I don't want to lose that. I thought that was really nice as well.
Apparently there was a couple of Southgate salutes on the stage last night.
Yes, I saw that, yeah.
When you think back now, what a centre-half pairing that was, Southgate and Ugo. I'm thinking now as to, like, who or what the equivalent would be now in the Premier League of the type of players, because they've both been England internationals. They'd both, maybe take out the top 1 or 2, although both in the peak would have done. But they both have strengthened most Premier League defences, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And centre halves who could do a bit of everything. They had the physicality, and Southgate said that that actually that second half against Bolton, yes, to a certain extent, Boro were under the cosh a little bit, and Bolton were kind of trying to get back into the game. But as Southgate said, really, what they were doing was meat and drink to him and Ehiogu. They were trying to hit diagonal balls into Kevin Davies. Well, as Southgate said, me and Ugo would take that all day long. You know what I mean? That was fine by us. So they could do all that, but then they were also good footballers, weren't they? I mean, I think that's probably an underrated part, certainly of Southgate's game as a player. That he was good with the ball at his feet. He was a threat from set pieces. He obviously probably gets downplayed a little bit because he was in an era where you had the kind of, before him, you had the kind of Bruce Pallister, all that kind of axis. And then afterwards, there was obviously the Terry Ferdinand, that kind of era. And from an England perspective, he probably fell a little bit between those two stools. But he was a really, and it was when I looked, I think he's got 96 England caps, certainly in the 90s, which, when you think of it, is quite something, isn't it?
And this is a debate for another day, clearly. But when you think of like the Borough's Riverside dream team, and you get the centre half, Woodgate the only one who make a case to get in.
Split them up. Yeah,
I think. I mean, I know then you've got Big Nat. I suppose because you've got Pearson.
Yeah.
Maybe Leicester, but Southgate and Eggyog stand alone, don't they?
I think so. I mean,
Woodgate, Big Nige, they're the four.
I mean, Woody had some fantastic moments with Boro, but the best bits of Woodgate's career were not in a Boro shirt, were they? You know, you'd have to say that really. So I think in terms of Boro's Riverside team, I think Pearson's probably the only one that would seriously threaten Southgate and Ehiogu as your centre half partnership.
I wouldn't fancy being the one telling Pearson that he wasn't in the
No,
team.
I wouldn't.
And you caught up with Steve Gibson as well for his memories of the day.
Yeah, which was nice as well. I mean, I think again what came out of there was just how emotional he got on the day, and even when he's looking back on it now, I think how much it all still means to him. You know that he's clearly taken Boro, you know, right from the dark days of '86 and everything. He's been there every step along the way of the roller coaster ride, hasn't he? And you know, there've been some pretty crushing lows, but there have been some fantastic highs, and clearly Cardiff being right at the top of them. And yeah, he told some decent stories about the day. The Sam Allardyce seagull story. I'd never heard that one.
I'd never heard that. No, I'd never heard that.
You just dropped it in, and
no pun intended.
And yeah, for those that haven't read the piece, and shame on you if you haven't, get on the Northern Echo website and read it. But yeah, he told this great story of how he'd been on the pitch to see McLaren pre-game and was just walking back up the tunnel with Keith Lamb, and Sam Allardyce was there walking from kind of the other end of the pitch, and showed him that a seagull had done its business on the kind of lapel of Allardyce's suit, which is quite hilarious, but was kind of beaming from face to face, saying, "Well, that's good luck. You know, that's it. We're going to win the cup now," kind of thing. And Steve said that from absolutely no one, he said to this day he has no idea where it came from, but suddenly Keith Lamb just had this cloth in his hand and wiped it off and said, "Right, well, that's the end of that. We'll see about that. No more good luck," kind of thing. And Boro got one over on Big Sam that time. Yeah.
I think what it shows. I think what it shows to the players of today, to the kind of lads coming through the academy, to Michael Carrick, is what success means to the town and what success means to the fans. Now, I'm not saying go and win another cup, because clearly that is extremely difficult for a club like Boro to do. You know, you look back at the recent league and FA Cup winners, it's extremely difficult for any club outside the top 5 or 6 in the Premier League to do, isn't it? But even how fondly the promotion winners from 2016 are remembered. And,
that day against Brighton was probably post Eindhoven as good a day as has been.
Yeah.
I think when fans look at, you know, a day and a moment for the club, I think post Eindhoven, that probably is the one that ticks the box. And, you know, there's no reason why there can't be another day like that. I mean, if Boro were to win a playoff final at Wembley, that would be quite something, wouldn't it? That would be right up there. I mean, you know, it wouldn't top Cardiff because it's not a major trophy. It wouldn't probably even top Eindhoven, even though we know the result didn't go there. But it would, you know, it would be straight away in the top 5 Boro moments from the last 3 decades, wouldn't it?
Oh, undoubtedly. Because when you say there about Brighton, I mean, if you look at like the Riverside era, the great occasions, that Liverpool Cup night, Basel, Stoya, Cardiff, clearly Eindhoven, and then it's probably that, but not probably, but that Brighton game is the other obvious one that's right in there, isn't it? And on that, one of the players who was obviously centrally involved, George Friend, announced his retirement.
Yeah.
And within his statement talked about how special, how much Boro means to him, how special the club and the town is to him. Just a word on him. Hopefully, I was going to say, if you're watching or listening, George, he's told me in the past he doesn't, but I'd like to believe that maybe one day he'll jump on. We'd love to get him on one day. But when you look back at signings of the Riverside era, for what he's cost, for what he went on to achieve, 299 games, he's undoubtedly up there. But he's one of those who, like Southgate, just got it, didn't he? Got what it meant to play for the club.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's no coincidence that he's still held in such massively high regard by the Boro fans and everything, isn't it? I mean, I think if you're talking about the last decade, probably, then you're probably saying Frendenhausen, aren't you? For the two signings that have, you know, elevated themselves to that kind of club legend type state.
Yeah, I think Frendenhausen and Leadbitter in that era are the three, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, I mean, I know Johnny Howson's obviously, you know, he's clearly not Boro, but he's Yorkshire. He's not a million miles away. George obviously came from absolutely the opposite end of the country, and yet, like you say, just got it straight away. Bought into everything around Boro, the community, the foundation stuff. He was obviously very central when there was the whole Save Our Steel and the Red Cur and everything like that, and you know, just absolutely threw himself into everything that the region and the club stood for, and also, you know, absolutely maximised everything that he had and gave absolutely everything out on the pitch, because you can do all of that and that'll take you to a certain point, but then ultimately you're always going to be judged to a degree on your performances, aren't you? And again, a bit like Southgate, I think sometimes what Friend was really good at got a bit underrated and underplayed sometimes, because it's one of the weird things with football, isn't it? And I always come back to this with Stewie Downing, that the best players and the best liked players often get judged the harshest. And I thought that with Friend, certainly towards the end, a lot of the time, that, you know, every little error he made got kind of blown up out of all proportions. And yet then he did play 10 games where he'd be absolutely rock solid and be great and be up and down the flank and all that. And that gets forgotten sometimes, I think, just how good a player he was.
In the season when Boro lost in the playoff final and the promotion winning season, I don't think there was a better left back in the championship, more consistent in the championship. And yeah, he drove standards, didn't he? He was, he's absolutely right up there in the conversation when you think of the most influential signings and the best signings, certainly in the championship era. And hopefully Boro's championship era comes to a close sometime soon this season. And
that's not because they're going to end up in League One.
No. Stoke on Saturday. I'm there. We'll have full coverage.
Yeah, come on, Dom. Come on, Stoke tomorrow. What we doing? You're going to get wet. You're going to get cold. You're going to get blown around. Are you going to see 3 points?
I think a draw.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk this week about how much it means to Stoke. I read a John Walters rallying cry earlier today. It feels like it's getting do or die for Stoke, doesn't it? At this stage, after the run they're on. I expected Stephen Schumacher to get more of a response than as he has done. But then when Schumacher went in, I thought, good appointment. But I've thought that with various appointments and various signings they've made, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't work.
One of those clubs, Stoke, aren't they, where whatever they've tried, and they've tried everything. They've tried throw money at it. They've tried young players. They've tried experienced managers. They've tried They've tried everything, and it just hasn't even looked like working. I mean, it's not even that they've kind of not been able to get back into Premier League. I struggle to think of a time when Stoke have really been involved in the promotion battle at this stage of the season since they came down.
When Alex Neil's Stoke came to the Riverside the back end of last season, I thought they were one of the best teams.
I remember you saying how impressed you were with them. Yeah.
And I thought then, like, they're going to end the season well and be in the mix again this season. But I've thought that on various occasions, and they just never are. 1-1 tomorrow, I reckon. What are you saying?
Do you know what? I either think Boro get beat 1-0 narrowly in a horrible game and Stoke just get over the line,
You're selling it.
Or I think they win comfortably, like 3-0 Boro. That's the way I see it. I think either the whole thing is a bit too much for Stoke and Boro can just pick them off on the counter-attack and run out comfortable winners, or it's a horrible arm wrestle and I don't fancy Boro in that scenario and I would take Stoke 1-0. So it's a different way of sitting on the fence, but I'm either going 1-0 Stoke or 3-0 Boro.
I was going to say, if you fancy a flutter, then we've tipped a score draw, a home win, and
I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so
exactly.
as long as it's not 0-0, we can sit here next time
there we go.
And reflect on a prediction done right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll have live coverage throughout the afternoon on Saturday from the Bet365 Stadium, and then analysis throughout the week, over the course of the weekend and into early next week. Please do subscribe, as Scott said at the start, if you haven't already. And if you listen on podcasts, then rate, review as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your weekend, and let's hope for 3 points at Stoke on Saturday afternoon.